Happy weekend, y'all. Josh's Severe Weather. I hope you're having a great weekend so far. I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I can say this weather has not been ideal. But, we all need to take a break, take a deep breath, and just relax and make the best of what we can because the weather gonna weather, as my friend Mitch West says. So let's talk about the tropics here in the coming days. And obviously, we've got one storm that we're dealing with here in the Carolinas today. I like to try and take a look at what potentially could be unfolding down the road. Now, this is very speculative, so nothing set in stone. It could change, but an area that I'm going to keep an eye on here, we've got another front that's going to move into the Gulf here next week, and some development possible here over the Eastern Gulf. Will it turn into anything major? Probably not. But certainly, if you're in Florida, the Southeast, and you want to try to have a better weekend next weekend with the weather, this may impact you. So we're just going to keep an eye on it at this point. No scaring, no hyping at this point. Just, hey, this is where we might see some low pressure forming. And generally speaking, that moisture is going to head into Florida and maybe up the southeast coast. So the string of wet weekends in the southeast may continue next weekend. That's what I'll be keeping an eye on for you guys here. Today, we do have some severe weather over the high plains expected once again. Same for tomorrow. Overall, not a super active pattern here in the plains, but something to keep an eye on. We had some rough weather yesterday, a few tornadoes reported, some very heavy rain and storms in the Denver area, certainly New Mexico and West Texas. And we do have that risk again today for some severe weather. Tomorrow, Sunday, we continue to see basically Mexico to Canada a threat for some marginal severe weather, some large hail possible, and maybe some intense winds. And then overall, a lesser extent of severe weather expected for Memorial Day on Monday, but still a chance. So we're going to keep an eye on that for you. But obviously, we're not in the most active of storm patterns despite the time of the year. Here's why. We have a Rex block. We've got an upper level low spinning, actually backing westward across the Mississippi Delta region in Arkansas, and that is drawing some moisture up the southeast coast. It's allowed a circulation to form here off the southeast coast, off the Carolinas. Nothing really tropical, but certainly the impact is the same as you would see from a tropical system. The high winds, the heavy waves, the heavy amount of rainfall, and just the miserable beach weather here at the coast. But we've certainly seen tropical systems form here that have looked a lot uglier. So there is certainly a case to be made that this system maybe could take on some subtropical characteristics, but its time over water is limited. Farther in the west, you see a trough moving into the northwest. That is bringing the increase in moisture into areas that really need that rain over Alberta and Western Canada. It's been pretty hot and dry. We've had wildfires, and this will certainly help that situation out. And then in between the two, we've just got some unstable weather with southwesterly winds aloft, sending moisture aloft into Texas and New Mexico, and that moisture spreading northward, and just a convergence zone where storms are likely to fire up in the coming days. So a very unusual pattern for late May, but not one that's unheard of. But we are certainly seeing some interesting weather to talk about, to say the least. Now, this is the cyclone that's formed along a front off of the South Carolina and Georgia coastline. I know it's been up for debate whether or not this should get a name. A few folks say it should, others say no. From a scientific perspective, pretty good argument that this is not turning into any sort of a tropical system, not going to get named Arlene or anything like that. Although it does have a warm core forming, it's also attached to a front. Nonetheless, that doesn't take away the impact that we're having, and that's just a really nasty day on the southeastern coast here. But a lot of dry, cool air coming down into northern Florida is producing some beautiful weather. So once you get west of this system, things are great. But if you're in the path of it, obviously, just a really nasty situation here. Here's a look back, though, at Tropical Storm Colin, which formed around the 4th of July weekend last year. And you can see it didn't look anything like this. The system we have now has a lot more organization to it, but the difference is that Colin was fully tropical. It produced tropical rains just like this system is, but inland, it was a warm air mass. Dew points were in the 60s and 70s. So sometimes what it looks like isn't necessarily what the structure is worth. This is Bertha from 2020. That was a late, this was actually today, 3 years ago. We had a quick forming tropical storm that came up and hit near Myrtle and Georgetown. That had 45-mile-per-hour winds. This system does as well, but that was fully in a tropical air mass. This one a little bit more in resemblance to what we have now because of the time of the year. So it's crazy in the weather world to say this reminds me of that storm, but you can go up and look at the data and it doesn't quite match up. But nonetheless, This system is going to be in our hair this weekend, and right now a 0% chance of any formation, tropically speaking. Although the Hurricane Center does acknowledge the gusty winds, the dangerous surf, the rip currents, and the heavy rainfall that's going to spread northward into the Carolinas and Virginia right on through Memorial Day. So nonetheless, whether or not it's going to form even in a subtropical system, which it looks like it's not according to them, and they're the ones that make the rules, then the weather is going to be just as nasty. Actually, it could be worse in Bertha, to be honest with you guys. With some of the winds that are coming up into Charleston Harbor, I'm seeing reports of 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts. So it's not worth getting into a fight with other folks about at this point, even though I've seen some arguing on social media, meteorologists versus weather fanatics. I'm staying out of it, okay? Not worth my time and energy. So that's that. All right, we have a risk for moderate flooding here today. Myrtle Beach, Horry County on up into the inner banks and even towards about Cape Lookout here. So we definitely have to be concerned with flooding, especially late today into tonight. A slight risk all the way up to the Blue Ridge tomorrow. That threat does shift inland and farther north up into the mid-Atlantic region, including West Virginia. Watch out on the Kanawha River, on the Ohio River for maybe some heavy rain that has a marginal risk of producing some street flooding and stream flooding. But the biggest risk is going to be here up against the mountains, basically from near Asheville, Black Mountain, right on up through Ashe County, all the way up to near Lynchburg and Blacksburg and Roanoke in Virginia. And day 3, at this point, we're not looking at a threat for excessive rain across the mid-Atlantic. This system opens up. A lot of the moisture gets lost. It runs in the drier air. We do have some rain in the forecast Memorial Day, but our best chance for any kind of flooding is going to be back across Texas. Here's a look at the NAM model, and this is a higher resolution model, so it sometimes picks out area of heavier rain. The NAM just came in a little bit too quickly with this moisture, so temperatures have warmed a little bit more than the NAM showed they would, but it's still cool and nasty out. And you can see the areas of biggest concern. We've got one area over the low country here, Tybee Island, Hilton Head, a couple inches of rain expected. Then you get up into New Hanover and Pender County, the potential for 4 or 5 inches of rain, even 3 to 4 inches here all the way up into the Outer Banks. So a really nasty day. Most of this rain today, tonight, first thing tomorrow. We also have to watch out for some heavy rain up against the mountains here where there could be some localized flooding, maybe 3 or 4 inches as well. In between, though, due to this higher resolution, we see areas that maybe aren't going to see as much rain if the NAM is right, and it may not be. It typically has some struggles. Looking at the European model, kind of more of the same here. You see kind of 2 maxima here, one near the coastline, the other up across the foothills region and getting up towards Boone and those areas through Memorial Day. But generally speaking, 1 to 3 inches of rain. Some places probably are going to pick up more than that, 3 or 4 inches of rain. Don't think we're going to see 10 inches or more out of this from what I'm seeing at this point. Here's the Canadian model, looks a lot like the others. You can see it actually takes more moisture in the next couple of days into Kentucky, West Virginia, and southern Ohio. So keep an eye on this region here. We may see a couple of inches of rain accumulating mostly over the next few days. Here's a look at wind speeds. Gusts off the coast, maybe as high as 70 to 83 miles per hour, maybe. Inland, we're probably looking at 40 to 50. Still pretty windy. We'll have some coastal flooding coming into the Charleston Harbor and some of the intracoastal waterway and really all the way up to Cape Lookout or so. Cape Fear to Cape Lookout, gusts over 50 miles per hour possible here. Most of those are going to come today. As our storm moves inland, we see lower amounts of wind gusts of 30 to 40, getting all the way up into the Piedmont and the foothills region as well. The European model isn't going to be as strong as the NAM, but it does show some gusty winds for the coastal plain. Generally speaking, 30 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts. And as we get to the coast, 50 to 60 on South Carolina's coastline. Okay, we already looked at that. Here are current temperatures, and the NAM was actually showing 40s farther west where it's near 60. The reason why the NAM was too quick in pushing the moisture in. But temperatures are probably going to start heading downhill as the rain picks up here this afternoon into tonight. And tomorrow morning's going to be nasty. So whether it's 60 or 50, it's still well below the average. But you can see this is where temperatures are now. The worst is actually around the Columbia area. Hi, Mitch. 52 degrees. With rain falling. So would be a nice day if this were February. That's what you would expect in February, but it is late May. And so unfortunately, we didn't win the lottery here. But if you get back west of Atlanta into Alabama, it's beautiful, sunny with temperatures around 70 degrees and low humidity, weather you just can't beat. So it just depends on what side of the storm that you're on. Here's our forecast highs today. All the areas circled are expected to have a record low high temperature. In many of these cases, this temperature was already met. We're actually down below that, probably not going to recover. 65 here in Charleston, 59 in Columbia, 57 in Aiken, 59 in Augusta, 63 in Spartanburg, or Greer, I guess this is, 59 in Charlotte, 60 in Raleigh. So well below the average. If you look at the anomaly here, this is how far below the average high we are. Most of this area is in that 15 to 30 degree range, 25, 28 degrees below average. So pretty rare air for this time of the year to see this kind of a below average temperature, but it's all because of the clouds, the moisture that's spreading in off the coast. Now let's take our look at the state of the tropics. We are heading towards an El Nino. We're not officially there, although we are on the warm side. Anything above 0 is neutral, and then 0.5 and higher is El Nino. So we're not fully there yet, but we're seeing trends in that direction. How strong the El Nino is in the fall and winter is going to play a big role in how extreme the weather ends up later this year. And it's really too soon to make that call because models are not going to agree yet. But obviously, as the summer wears on, I'm going to be able to give you guys more insight on it. But we're definitely trending in that direction. Again, not cause for immediate concern, but obviously we're going to have to keep an eye on things. Right now, water temperatures over the Pacific have warmed. We still have a cool pool here left over off the Mexican and Pacific coast, but the trend has been for that to warm up. And you can see pretty warm waters east of the Philippines, right where that typhoon is headed. I'll talk about that in a minute. Very warm over the Gulf and over the Eastern Pacific here. Definitely an El Nino pattern here. And this will continue to warm the waters in here. The waters are already starting off warm, coming off of 3 years of La Nina in the Atlantic. So we're going to see an increasing El Nino, but also above average water temperatures. That could mean a very challenging tropical season forecast. I just saw the UK Met Office was forecasting 20 named storms in the Atlantic Basin. The average is about 14. Last year, I think we had 17. So it is still predicting an above average season despite the El Nino. So just because we're heading into an El Nino doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be all out El Nino this fall. We could certainly still have some destructive storms in the Atlantic Basin. Where and when, again, nobody exactly knows, but this is now that is the time to start preparing. I've already warned you guys that just because really it only takes one. This could be like 2018 where we transition. We don't fully go El Nino until after the season. That was the year of Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Michael. The above average water temperatures favored that. Certainly something we're going to be keeping an eye on. Now, trending cooler across the Atlantic Basin, but trending warmer over the Caribbean and the Gulf. So generally speaking, there has been a warming trend over the basin. It's cooling off here because of the typhoon that's upwelling the water, but overall, the waters have warmed over the last 7 days. Here's a look at the Gulf of Mexico, the Western Atlantic. Everybody's above average except right along the immediate coast. This is why we're not seeing any kind of rapid tropical organization because water levels or water temperatures are still a bit below the average. Really, to see something ramp up as it hits, you would want to typically have above average temperatures or around average temperatures, and that's not what we have at this point. But over the open waters, the Gulf Stream is warmer than average. The warm loop current of the Gulf is above average. The Northwest Caribbean is running above average. So we're running hot already. And as we start heading into that time of year when we start to have a better chance of seeing development, we've got this to add into the potential of the storm fuel. So wind shear may fight these systems off when they get closer to land. They've got warm waters. We could see, again, storms that very quickly organize in the couple of days leading up to landfall. That's nothing uncommon. It's what we've seen here in the last several years. Although we have seen cooling near the waters here due to the cooler than average temperatures. This could reverse itself, though, as we get later into June. All right, so I'm going to talk technical here. This is the Madden-Julian oscillation. And I'll come right back to this. Right now, we are in a phase 7. This favors lift over the Western Pacific. This is where most of the storm development is, Western Pacific. But we are trending after Memorial Day towards a phase 8, and then into the beginning of June towards a phase 1. And these are favorable phases for lifting and increased moisture and increased thunderstorm development in the Atlantic. I'm going to explain things to you. This is phase 7 right now. The area blue is where we see more favorable weather for thunderstorm development and for potential tropical development. We were in a 6 here in the Western Pacific. That's why we saw this typhoon go to town here. A couple weeks before, we were in a 4 and a 5. That's why we saw the system here in the Bay of Bengal. Now, as we get towards 7 and eventually towards 8, we will see a better, more favorable environment for storms to start to develop tropically here as we get into phase 8 and phase 1. And the time frame for that, according to the Australian model here, phase 8, we're looking at the first and second week of June. Not a super ample pattern. We want to see it out here if we really want to see things anomalous, but this would favor more likely some development here, slow, but some development in the Eastern Pacific and then in the Gulf and Western Atlantic, and then phase one as well. So right through about the middle of June, according to this, and then a less favorable phase as we vary on into phases two and three. So we do have a window, basically the first half of June, where we could see at least one named storm here in the Atlantic Basin. Here's a look at the upper level pattern. This is the ensemble forecast, GEFS. I don't know why this is not loading, but you can see, wow, this is El Nino-esque here with a very strong subtropical jet feeding moisture from Hawaii straight into Mexico. This is going to feed into a more active weather pattern across the plains. This will continue into the Gulf, but notice how it does weaken with time. As these winds aloft relax, we get a little bit less wind shear. We have a ridge forming, and we start to see a little bit more favorable weather here for development over the Gulf. Doesn't mean we're going to have a rapidly intensifying system, but it does mean conditions are a little bit more favorable than how they have been. And as we head into the second week of June, we continue to see a position of the ridge in the northern parts of the plains here. Trough backs up into the western part of the U.S. and really backs up in the Eastern Pacific. Another trough over the eastern U.S., so it's not going to warm up quickly here, but where trough gets left behind, we may have to keep an eye on things tropically speaking here. Here's a look at our 500 millibar height anomaly. Obviously, it's unusually cold aloft here across the southeastern United States. This anomaly kind of gets replaced by another one. More moisture left behind here in the eastern Gulf. You can see how cool it is in the southwest. All the heat is actually up in Canada, or at least central and western Canada. Another trough moves into the western U.S. This is next weekend, and you can see we're right back to below average heights. So it is going to start warming up in the eastern U.S. here towards the middle and second part of next week. Then it cools right back down over the weekend. Beyond that, though, as we head more into an MJO phase 2 and phase 3, we see this ridge start to begin to move back to the west. This brings more active weather back into the north central United States, drier weather to the west, and we start to warm up across the Gulf. So things are going to change here in about 15 days. Here's a look at the European as we get into next week. You can see pressures are lowering over the central Gulf around the 1st of June. Here's the 2nd of June, 3rd of June, and lower than average pressures here over the Florida area and on either side of Florida. Possible development. It's not going to be big development, but possible development. And it may be something to keep an eye on either over Florida or over the Southwest Atlantic here next weekend. So that's what I'm going to be watching for you guys here. The GEM, this is the Canadian model. As we go on to about the middle of next week, we see lowering surface pressure and possible development off the southeast coast here around the 2nd and 3rd. So this shows yet another weekend storm affecting the Carolinas here. According to this, it actually brings a tropical system or a subtropical system right up into North Myrtle Beach here this time next weekend. So another beach weekend possibly going down the crapper here. Here's the GFS model. You can see it develops things farther back to the south of Louisiana later next week, but brings that moisture into Florida next weekend. Doesn't bring us an organized system until Monday the 5th. But regardless, Florida's going to get wet, and we could see a revamped active pattern here from Georgia up to North Carolina around the 3rd and 5th of June, including next weekend. The German icon model, this is not my favorite model in the world, but sometimes it picks up on these features. You can see it's got a weakening, or it's got a weaker low pressure system over the northern Gulf next Thursday, and that heads northeast towards the Big Bend of Florida next Saturday, and lower pressure here across the southeast. So every model shows some form of front with low pressure along it here at the end of next week, and maybe an organized system off the southeast coast next weekend once again. European anomalies here, we can see, look how wet it is across the eastern Gulf and especially Florida and the Bahamas next weekend, and we see this moisture trying to creep back up. It's pretty dry across the upper Midwest and the Northeast, but we are going to see a flip coming where wetter weather returns to the eastern U.S. in the following week as well. Here's a look at precipitable water. This is where we see all this moisture, and look how it builds over the north central Gulf, Louisiana, Mississippi, Mobile. You can see, look how wet it is in Florida aloft here next Friday into Saturday. A lot of juice in the air, and this tries to back into South Carolina on the 4th and 5th. So very wet pattern, a lot of moisture feed right in the eastern Gulf and right over the Florida and the southwestern Atlantic. Really can't spend a lot of time looking on it, but Here's a look at our current system. You can see it doesn't have that tropical feel, but it does have tropical moisture with it. It's just not fully going to get a chance to go tropical because look how dry it is back here over the Western Carolinas and Georgia. Dew points in the 40s and 50s. Now, as we get into next week, we still see some pretty comfortable air in place over Georgia and South Carolina, but overall it is turning more humid. Dew points back in the 60s and 70s from Louisiana into Florida and even down up to about Beaufort and Charleston. As we get into next weekend and the beginning of the following week, this moisture does start to penetrate farther inland into South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina. So enjoy the cooler weather while we can. It's going to start getting moisture here by next weekend and beyond. Here's the Pacific, and let me make this smaller if I can for you guys. This is Super Typhoon Mawar. It's actually weakened. It still has a very big eye, but overall it has come down in intensity. The eye wall replaced itself. That allowed the inner structure to collapse a little bit. Now it's reformed, but it's not as strong as it was this time yesterday. Still a powerful storm, but out kind of in the middle of the Philippine Sea, not really affecting land. And the overall forecast for Mawar continues to show that it's going to recurve away from the Philippines and Taiwan. It may clip the islands here southwest of Japan. That includes Okinawa, but it is going to be a weaker system at this point, only a tropical storm. So it's not going to keep all of its strength here over the next couple of days. And here's the official forecast showing weakening here down to a category 3 typhoon in the next 24 hours, category 2. And then by the time it passes east of Taiwan, just to category 1 as it reaches some cooler waters. It is still May and there's increasing wind shear, but this shows a recurve. And anytime we have a recurving typhoon, that's going to increase the intensity of the jet stream and make it more ample here, leading to more extremes as we head into the month of June. Thank you so much for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'll have more coming up for you guys. I thank you for your time today on this longer video. I was going to run to the gym, so I put my contacts in. I got my gym shirt that blends in nicely here. But anyway, enough about me. I want to give all the glory to God, who's given me the strength to do this video. I was trying to get some rest and kind of process things here. Some of you watched me yesterday, realized that I'm dealing with some family stuff. Haven't announced it to all my family, but they're not watching this. But my stepfather's been diagnosed with liver cancer, and just if you could pray for him, I very much appreciate that. Happy to pray for you guys as well, no matter what you're going through. I know we all deal with struggles, financial, health, relationship struggles, but in my opinion, we need to turn to the Lord and tell him how big, tell our challenges how big he is. I wanted to read you guys a quick verse because I'm a man of faith, and it's important to me to continue to show everybody why I do what I do, because I've been called by God to share the weather with folks, but also called to share my faith. Psalm 91, this is from the New Living Translation. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust him. For he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He'll cover you with his feathers. He will shelter you with his wings. His faithful promises are your armor and your protection. No matter what's going on in the world today, we always have somebody that we can turn to, that we can repent. And that is the Lord, who is faithful. Other people may let us down. The Lord will not let us down. He is there as our place of safety. And I just wanted to share that good news with you. If you're going through a tough time, that the Lord is there for you, whether or not you believe in him. But he created us, and he has given us the refuge, and he is the one entity that will never, never forsake us. That means a lot to me, and I really hope it means that to you. Thank you so much for your time. No video tomorrow. We'll have a Memorial Day video, and I just want to remember those who have given their lives for this country and lost them, for they have given us the freedoms that we have, and I don't take that lightly. I hope you don't either. Thank you all so much. Have a blessed weekend. Catch you on Monday.